Hello friends, for today's video I want to go through a list of some epic fantasy series. I know a lot of people are concerned that epic fantasy is no longer going to be with us moving forward, but there are actually still quite a few series that some of which are even still coming out that I think a lot of people, if you are wanting to scratch that epic fantasy itch, you have these series to go to. Because I want this to serve as a general reference point for epic fantasy, I still wanted to at the very least mention some of the ones that are quintessential and that get recommended by a lot of the fantasy fans, so that if you do come to this and you're newer to epic fantasy, you have those in your head as well. And I did find that because I don't want to linger too much on those ones and I want to more so focus on the lesser known works, I thought what would be helpful is to do not an exact one-to-one, if you like this, try that, but to give an idea of the ones that are the sort of quintessential epic fantasy recommendations, to find one of the newer ones that has something within it that is similar. Again, it's not going to be a true, this is going to very much definitely appeal to you, but what makes it epic fantasy, that specific thing might be appealing in both the popular one and the lesser known one. Just a heads up, I recommend books even if they didn't work for me, because I know a lot of us are looking for different things when we pick up stories, especially with epic fantasy. There's just no specific definition of what epic fantasy is, other than usually the settings are large, there's a lot of perspectives, and you often find that the stakes are near world ending, if not apocalyptic. So with those three things in mind, all of the books I'm going to talk about fit under that umbrella, but we're going to dive into the individual aspects and elements that make them each unique. And I'm going to start with Wheel of Time, because I know for a lot of people that is one of the books they grew up reading, one of the series they grew up reading. They remember waiting for the next entries. I know a lot of people have come to Wheel of Time as adults, and that's kind of been their entry point. And what makes this such a good first one to discuss is the fact that it is such a good reference point. It is something so many of us have heard of, especially with the adaptation. It's become even more popularized. It's been around for a long time, and it has a lot of the things that we identify as fantasy. It's got the orc-like beings, it's got the quest, it's got the Dark Lord, it's got all of those elements mixed in. And so if you are looking for something that really feels like classic fantasy, but with a little bit of a newer, more modern twist, definitely check out the Echoes saga. This is one that is 9 books long, so there's a lot to it, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe the author's other works, some of them also exist within this world, and you're going to hear about the lore within the Echoes saga, and then you can explore that lore in the other books, which I think is really exciting. And also there's a particular character that if you want to learn more about them, you can find their story in some of the other works. So it's not just that this one series is epic, but there's more to explore if you fall in love with the world, which I think if you like classic fantasy, you more than likely will. On top of all of that, both of these do have that quest fantasy feeling to them. If you like that, I'll also mention the Green Riders series. This is one that is ongoing, and it has almost a feeling of coziness to it because it has that nostalgic, I'm sitting by the fire being told this tale, and I definitely think that both of these are great if you are somebody who likes the classic fantasy feel that you find within Wheel of Time. Next up, we have, rather than just a single series that is epic fantasy, I'm thinking of the entirety of the world, and that would be Realm of the Elderlings. Certainly something like the Farseer trilogy is a lot more personal, but what a lot of people end up falling in love with the Realm of the Elderlings is the fact that you get to know certain characters very intimately within the first trilogy, which for most people, their entry point is the Farseer trilogy. If you don't start with Farseer, then the other series you likely will have picked up would be the Live Ship Traders, and these are your 2 entry points. And then from there, you can explore the Rain Wilds, and then you can also revisit certain characters and follow their stories as they get older in future installments within the Realm of the Elderlings. And as a result, it just continues to build and build and build, but while still maintaining a little bit more of that personal connection that a lot of people really like, especially because so many of us, we want epic fantasy, but we've also been kind of spoiled with really great character work in a lot of more modern fantasy. Not that classic fantasy doesn't have it too, but I do think a lot of modern fantasy is a lot closer to the characters, or at the very least, when it's not epic, it allows for you to have this more intimate connection with them. And so Hobb fulfills that for a lot of people, and if you like that feeling, then the Valdemar series is going to have that as well. Valdemar is actually older than Realm of the Elderlings, and I personally, when I picked up Valdemar, I had started with Hobb, as I find a lot of newer fantasy fans have, and it was interesting going back and actually reading a work that was older, but that we still have things being written within. There's so many books in the Valdemar world. I personally, though, when I picked up Valdemar, I thought that there were a lot of things that potentially might have influenced Hobb and Robert Jordan. There was just certain aspects of Valdemar that I noted. Even the term Farseer was used in Valdemar, and just the way in which the author Mercedes Lackey approached the epic fantasy world building by having these series within a greater series. Even that approach is something that is similar. So if you like the let's get to know these characters really personally, but then we hear about other characters, okay, now we're going to follow them. Okay, well, now I heard about this lore and I want to go back to this lore. Both of these are going to have that. The next one is going to be the least like the quintessential example, and it's really just the tie of the trope gods among us, or the possibility of gods among us, and that would be Malazan and the Bloodsworn saga. So Bloodsworn is Viking, essentially inspired fantasy, and while I definitely think the settings and the way in which we follow characters and the writing itself is drastically different between these two series. The Gods Among Us, if you like that, then I think that both of these are going to fulfill that for you. Malazan is a series that, honestly, when I was trying to figure out, of all the newer ones, I was like, which one is the most like Malazan? Nothing's like Malazan. It is enormous, and I feel bad for Malazan fans in a sense, because there's just really not that much else out there, at least not that much I've found. If you yourself are a Malazan fan, feel free to leave your recommendations in the comments for other Malazan fans. But while it didn't end up working for me, I will admit I've not found anything else quite like it. It just spans such an enormous amount of time. There's so many different characters. It's very convoluted. It doesn't really try to explain anything to you. It doesn't really try to fill you in. It's almost like once you've read through enough of it, you can kind of piece together things, and then when you go to reread it, you're like, okay, well, now I have some context, so let's see if things will make more sense this time around. And a little bit the closest thing really is the Souls video games, the Soulsborne games, where you're like, okay, I didn't really understand anything that was going on. Let me see what people on the internet have said. Okay, I think I have a little bit of an idea, so now I actually know what's going on in this cutscene during this boss fight. I don't think any books really fulfill that quite so much, but Bloodsworn, if it is something you're interested in, if you like the Gods Among Us or the possibility of Gods Among Us, perhaps gods were once among us, if you do like that trope, Bloodsworn is really fun in that it has that Nordic setting, it has nods to Norse mythology, while still maintaining a lot of individuality and creativity. And I really, really like the perspectives that you get. Something that John Gwynne gets praised for all the time is having a perspective from a villainous or antagonistic like character that you are like, I don't like reading from this perspective. I really hate this character. But then you're like, how often do I get to read from the perspective of the worst person? Oh my gosh, I can't stand them. So I do really enjoy that he incorporates that and he doesn't shy away from those kinds of perspectives as well. Next up, we have Stormlight Archive. Obviously, this in and of itself is not yet completed, and there is more to be written, not just for the first arc, but for the second arc way in the future. So even this fulfills it's slightly on the newer side. However, most people are aware of Stormlight Archive. So the thing I wanted to mention, which is completed, we kind of have a reversal of roles here, would be the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. The thing that I'm connecting between these two series is just the innovation of them. I wish Winnowing Flame had as big of a readership as the Stormlight Archive series, because so much of what we fall in love with Stormlight Archive is how different it is from so much else we've read. Of course, there's phenomenal character work. That's, I would say, number one reason so many of us fall in love with it. However, I have not found too much fantasy that really fulfills the sci fantasy craving so many of us have, where it genuinely feels like a different world from our own. It feels like a different planet. It feels like it actually exists, and he's just giving us a peek into that. And if you are somebody who hasn't really had a chance to experience fantasy of that sort, that has that phenomenal epic world building, but that it's not just fantasy leaning, but leans into other areas as well, Winnowing Flame has that so perfectly. It has a lot of sci-fi elements to it, and I'd almost argue it has some horror elements to it as well. It is so weird. It gets so weird, and if you've read the first book or maybe even the first 2 books, you'd be like, yeah, I see it. I see how weird it is, and I have to always be like, no. Just wait till book 3. It gets even weirder. And I love that about it. I've not found anything else quite like Winnowing Flame, except for in the innovation category, Stormlight Archive. I just feel these are both so incredibly unique. And if you're looking for something that's a little bit of a genre bender and epic fantasy with really intense stakes, Winnowing Flame definitely has that. Last for today, I'm going to give a comparison between Mistborn and Age of Uprising. So Mistborn for me, I in the past wouldn't have really considered this epic fantasy, but when I do think about the epic stakes part of epic fantasy for a lot of people, Mistborn absolutely fulfills that, especially by the end of even just the original trilogy, but also the fact that similar to what we discussed with Hobb and with Mercedes Lackey, where they have series within series, Mistborn has that. We already have Mistborn Era 1 and Mistborn Era 2 completed. We have Mistborn Secret History, and we will likely be getting Mistborn Era 3 and Era 4 sometime in the future. So it fulfills that, and it has the really intense stakes. For Age of Uprising, the reason I am putting it within a similar category to Mistborn is both of these have house wars. Both of them have some kind of resistance component, and they both have religion as a aspect of the story that plays a role somewhat in the resistance as well. What I think is kind of a fun difference between these is where in Mistborn you have the characters leading the resistance, in Age of Uprising, you have the characters currently holding the power as your perspectives, and then you are seeing them try to deal with an uprising that begins when they are currently the leaders of a house. And in that sense, I really like that kind of reversal. It'd almost be like, what if you followed, if you are familiar with Mistborn, if you followed the noble houses as a perspective instead of the resistance? And I think that idea is kind of fun. I actually kind of wish I could reread Mistborn and then read Age of Uprising, or like alternate between entries in those series. I think that would be kind of a fun experience. But yeah, if you are like, oh yeah, the idea of the reversal sounds really interesting actually, then I think this would be a fun one to check out. I will say, I think Age of Uprising, honestly, is a little bit more like A Song of Ice and Fire, but I can only say that as somebody who has watched the show, and also A Song of Ice and Fire isn't completed. I've always wanted to read it, but I was always waiting for it to be completed, and I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But I really do think Age of Uprising has a little bit of that A Song of Ice and Fire feel to it, so just take what you will from that statement. But anyway, that's it for some epic fantasy series, some of which are the ones that get mentioned all the time, and then some of which are slightly newer ones, and ones that are ongoing. If you have your own epic fantasy recommendations, or just things that you want to throw out there about any of the series I mentioned, feel free to do so. I will have all these linked in case you'd like to check them out. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.